Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for another edition of Adam Interviews. Today, we're going to be interviewing some folks who are helping our community in a very fundamental way. They are education leaders over in the Gates-Chili School District, and you might have gotten a note, an email, letter from your district if you have kids, talking about how there's a shift in how they're going to be teaching literacy, how they're going to teach kids to read. The word phonics has come up. There might be a lot of questions as to, well, what's actually changing? What existed before this and what's actually going to be happening now? I know I have questions as a dad myself. So joining us to help clear all this out, again, two people from the Gates-Chili School District, which has really been on the cutting edge of this. And we're going to talk about that. Sarah Messino, she is the Director of Elementary Education. Thank you so much, Sarah, for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
Of course. And then we've got Jen Christensen, the K-5 literacy leader. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
Of course. So, Sarah, we're going to start with you, if you don't mind, talking about what the change is. What are we actually dealing with here?
Sure. So I think it's important to acknowledge that both Jen and I came into our roles around the same time, roughly about 4 years ago. And in doing so, one of the first things that we did was really try to get to know our students' population on a deeper level and how they were responding to instruction. During that time, we realized teachers were working very hard, but our students weren't responding at the rate that we would expect, given the effort that was being put forth by our instructional staff. So really, it took some time for Jen and I to kind of look through, read, research some things, and realize we needed to make a shift in our literacy instruction. And so we have, over the course of the last couple of years, been on this journey of learning, growing, empowering teachers, and now it's coming into the classroom for our students to now have an impact for them.
So why don't we just dive in a little bit deeper, Sarah, before we talk with Jen. What wasn't working specifically for kids? Why don't you think it was working?
Sure. So I think, students are all different, right? They walk into our classrooms. There's not a single profile that we can guarantee is going to walk in. However, we do know with the reading research that how students are can learn to read. And so we really realized that we needed to make sure the practices and the things that we were doing in our classroom aligned to that reading research. And so there has been a little bit of a lag of that research getting to practice in the sense of what we are learning in higher ed, what we may be learning in other professional learnings might not always align because there were a lot of perspectives in terms of how and what a best practice really meant. So in Gates-Chili, we needed to define that. And for us, when we talk about best practice, that means it's aligned to the reading research.
Mm-hmm. And the research, Jen, what was it saying to you? What were you seeing in the research?
So as Sarah and I started to do a lot of learning on our own first, we noticed that it was really important to provide systematic and explicit instruction. So what that means is that we had to have a structure in place to know what our students were learning at each grade level. So we had vertical alignment across. It also meant that when we were going to teach something, we were going to be very intentional with how we were teaching it to our students, aligning with what research says about development as far as literacy goes. And again, being responsive to the students in our classroom is a key component to it.
According to a really in-depth article that Gates-Chili did put out, they were saying that the goal is to have kids reading by third grade. So why don't we walk through each grade? In first grade, what does that look like with the changes now? Again, it's kind of a more uniform approach. Jen, we'll stick with you for a moment here. What does that look like in first grade for kids?
All right, so even going back down to kindergarten, we start off with really building our students' awareness of sounds within our language, as well as building their understanding of the symbols that we use, our letters, within the language, and building that initial sound base. So our kindergartners are starting to leave being able to read basic words like cat and hat. And then as we go into first grade, our students start to build off of that. So we start to build more complex words. So they have more sounds within those words. And there's also other phonics patterns in there that students can learn, but pose a few more challenges for them. And that's where we talk about with our colleagues, those using the research to be very explicit with our students and following that gradual release process. So being making sure we do a lot of modeling, practicing as a whole group, and then gradually releasing it on to our students.
Sarah, it seems like there's a lot of psychology built into this and how the brain works and develops.
So there is. And so that was really kind of the foundation of the work that we've done to make the shift to the reading sciences in Gates Chili. We recognized teachers came with different and varying levels of knowledge about reading development. As elementary teachers, they may take a couple classes with reading in their undergrad, and then what they get their master's in is, varies. And so we really felt like as a district, we needed to invest in our teachers and make sure no matter what direction we went, everybody had to have a common knowledge base. And so Jen is actually our in-district facilitator for a 4-day training that is required of all of our teachers. And so we have pushed through every elementary teacher, speech, language, psychologist, special ed, ESL, through a training of 4 days. And then we have a system now where we're able to sustain that for new to district staff as well. And we are now moving on to the next phase of that training, which is a second level. But because we recognized teachers needed to understand how the brain works, they needed to understand reading development, and we needed to ensure everybody had a common understanding of that. So as we were going to move forward with what we defined as best practice, any instructional changes we made to their day, resources, they understood the why behind it. Because that is really important when you're trying to make district-wide systemic change.
Absolutely. And while it does appear that there's a lot of in-district program change going on, is this prompted by or in relation to the changes or the push at the state level from Governor Hochul's office, the Back to Basics program that we heard about last year?
Sure. So actually, this was in response to our students in Gates Chili. We have been very focused on being data informed, improving our assessment systems to really understand our students. And so on our own, started to do this work. And fortunately, because we're all looking at the same body of research, right? The research is the research. We were in alignment with the state as things were coming out with the state. So just making sure that as we are moving forward with the work that we believe our students need, that also is aligned to where our state is looking to go as well.
So Jen, the one thing I've noticed over time is in almost any industry, but in education in particular, sometimes you get some leaders who may not have been in the classroom, may not have actually taught, but they have 5 masters and 3 PhDs, and they come out with plans that have all these bells and whistles, but might not be applicable in the classroom. Is that kind of what happened here, where there was a lot of theory behind some of the stuff we've seen over the last generation or so, and we are kind of getting back to the basics? And again, I'm asking this, I know it sounds like I'm actually assuming that's the case, but I'm not. I have no idea, but sometimes this is what happens in various industries.
Well, I can speak to the approach here in Gates Chili. So both Sarah and I were actually classroom teachers, both in Gates Chili before shifting into our roles. And the approach that Gates Chili has taken has been a very collaborative approach. So the various stakeholders have been a part of the conversations, whether it's at the district level, within Sarah's role, or our building leadership. All the way inclusive of our classroom teachers have been a part of helping to make some of those shifts within making sure that what we see in the research and what we're going to do in the classroom is going to be feasible and going to make the greatest impact for the students in Gates Chili.
So then why don't I direct it to Sarah then? Thank you, Jen. I guess, did you find that the past plans that were coming forward were perhaps missing the mark because they were developed by people who may not have had that 4-day training or been in the classroom? I guess what was the issue? What was the problem that you saw on the state level?
Again, I can't really speak to the state level. I can say that as a district, I think it wasn't necessarily that we were doing anything wrong. I think at the time that worked for the students we had in front of us, and so as our being responsive to the population, it was really important that what we were doing wasn't yielding the results that we would hope. We had to change. And so we can't change the students, right? We can change our systems and our practices. So I don't think, again, that it was wrong. I think it at the time worked for the students and the teachers that were there and whatever the expectations were from a state perspective. But for us, it wasn't working anymore. And so it was really important that we acknowledge that and admit that it doesn't work. And so we need to make a change for students.
What should parents know about this change? Will they notice any difference at home or anything like that?
Sure, great. And that's an area that we are still like growing in, because it's really important for us to make sure our staff has the capacity to understand, they have the knowledge, and as they're implementing, families will start to see probably their students noticing words, connecting words, a lot of word chaining, like hopefully excited, and they might be noticing that they're able to speak the vocabulary. Jen mentioned like digraphs and vowels and things like that, and our students at the youngest grades know and understand that terminology now, from phoneme to grapheme to phonics. They're able to define and know and understand that, where in the past that wasn't the case.
So Jen, how can parents help in this regard with the kind of switch, if you will?
So what's really important to always keep in mind is that research speaks to the importance of oral language being the foundation for literacy. So talking with your child, reading aloud with your student, and providing that rich vocabulary when you're talking, even at the dinner table, can be very supportive of our students as during their growth journey. Having students go to the library and pick out books, but we know that all of our families love and care for our students, and it might look different from family to family. And, one thing that we want to make sure that we do is foster that trust, that when their students come to us, we are going to make sure that we use that knowledge base and what research is showing us to do everything that we can to ensure that their child leaves us becoming that skilled and proficient reader.
It seems to me, Jen, that we're dealing with something that requires an organic element, which is reading to your kids, getting them to love reading, whether it's starting with picture books or something like that. But then there's almost a scientific part of this as well. And that blend is, I think, what people have been working on so hard. But if you wouldn't mind diving into that for me a little bit.
Absolutely. So when we go to do some of our professional learning, we almost speak to that we are very similar to the medical field, that we have to stay up with current research around how the brain learns to read, and what researchers are saying to inform what it is that we are doing with our students. So it's really important to keep up with current practices and not just think, oh, well, I've been in the field for a long time, and stick with what may be comfortable to us. And so that's been a little bit of a learning curve. But one of the biggest ideas that we work with our colleagues to understand is that reading isn't natural. Some students need a lot of intentional and explicit instruction to learn. Some may get it after just a few exposures, but either way, we want to make sure that that we can ensure that we have provided as many opportunities as possible for our students to learn.
I think that's a very interesting point. I guess I never really thought about that. Reading is not natural. It's not built in.
Our brains were actually wired for talking,
right,
as humans, not
that's
necessarily
so
to read. So we're trying to connect two different really parts of the brain that are not right near each other. And so we are essentially rewiring it as we're teaching the kids how to read and spell.
So what would you think, Sarah, is the most counterintuitive but productive part of teaching a kid how to read, where if you explain it to someone, they're like, really, that's what works? Is there a part of this that you're like, that's...
I think sometimes we might make it more complex. And it is a complex thing, but this going back to basics is a great way of putting it, that really going back to letters and sounds. I think in some ways we were maybe pushing students too fast. And so now really, like Jen mentioned, the oral language, like how important that is, a precursor, that's a pre-literate skill to reading and writing, that we really have taken advantage of, having students speak in full sentences, having them retell stories, act them out, all of that stuff that seems like play or simple, it has so much power, right? Because if students can't speak it, they can't read it and they can't write it. And so I think as we worked with teachers and really anchored into our standards and anchored into the research, realized we may have been overshooting some things, and that it's okay to come back to the basics, right?
Yeah.
Because it's slow to take off,
Yeah. And Sarah, the next question is going to seem obvious, but while it may be, the importance, I think, needs to be underlined to get kids to a level where they can read by third grade. How important is that?
It is very important, and something that we take a lot of responsibility for. We feel that this is our job, right? It is. And so we know that there's a lot of research out there that once students are not at grade level by then, that there's a lot of difficulty to get them on to grade level. And so we're really trying to build systems to ensure that we can do that for our students, and how we can have a safety net for students that might not be there yet. Our secondary colleagues are working really hard to align themselves to the work of the elementary and shift some things so that we can ensure alignment from elementary to secondary. And also thinking about students who come to us in the middle, like not students that are with us from kindergarten to 5th grade, right, who have gotten this experience. Because curriculum is a local decision, right? They may have a different experience before they come to Gates Chili. And so really building systems that if students come to us in 2nd grade and 3rd grade, how do we ensure that they get this opportunity as well?
Yeah, and I think it was spelled out very well in the Gates Chili article that if you, Jen, don't learn how to read by 3rd grade, starting to master other subjects, it's one of those skills you need in every other area of education.
As skilled and proficient readers, we take for granted what we're able to do on a day-to-day basis, whether it's going to the grocery store, being able to read a label, or filling out a form at the doctor's office. So we know that becoming that skilled and proficient writer can change life outcomes. And we take it very seriously and think about each of our students each day and how we're going to help lead to better life outcomes for them.
I think one of the challenges that I see from an outsider's perspective is you get kids, let's say in kindergarten, sometimes pre-K, and they've already had 3-4 years without instruction or anything like that. And you get kids who might come in on an uneven playing field, both nutrition-wise, and the second one that may be even more important is reading-wise, because maybe they didn't have people reading to them. How do you catch them up, those who didn't have that advantage?
Sure. That's a great question, because it's often something that people want to like really focus on, and those are things we can't control, right? But what we can control is the minute those students walk in our door. So what are the systems that we have? So that's a high quality tier 1, instruction, where we've clearly defined the explicit, the intentional teaching that's going to happen in each of those classrooms, knowing those students are going to get that. It's then having a system in place for students that may need that repeated exposure. Like Jen said, some of our students may get it in those couple of exposures. Some students might need something a little bit more. So setting it up to have a clear way to define who are those kids, and then how do we monitor them? So we're really trying to build a system that kind of has this tiered response to that for our students, so that when they are in our doors, that playing field, we're not going to use that anymore, right? Like they come in, we're going to make sure we have systems in place to catch everybody up.
And I'm assuming that they can. The kids can.
They absolutely can.
That's good, because you're catching them early enough.
Yes.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So, Jen, one question for you is, with all the technology coming out, whether it's AI or a lot of audio cues, do you find that kids aren't reading as much, or do you worry that they may not have to read as much? Because even I find myself saying, read that text to me, and so we're in a changing world. What impact do you think that will have?
You're right. Our world is continually evolving. However, there's still going to be a layer and a need for our students to be able to read. And so I can't control necessarily what happens outside of the classroom as far as their technology use. But we've talked about the importance in the classroom of our teachers reading aloud to our students, K through 5, making sure our students are engaging with text. Is there a layer or role for technology? Absolutely. But we want to make sure that we are constantly reflecting on and responding to what the data says for our students and how it aligns with both the research as well as the guidance put out by New York State.
And I want to step back real quick. Sarah, you had mentioned something, kids coming in maybe in a different reading level or no reading level. And you mentioned the word tier 1, just for my own layman's perspective. Would you mind just going into what that means?
Sure. So in education, when we refer to tier 1, we refer to that first level of high quality instruction, that grade level instruction that all students have access to. And so that is that first level of intervention, we kind of say in Gates Chili, that's where our best practices, where we're going to catch most of our students and ensure they're getting that high quality learning opportunity. From there, we have assessments in place. So if students aren't responding to that in a way they should be, then how do we provide them an additional support, which then we refer to as a tier 2. So it's a kind of moving through these tiers of additional support for students.
You know, this next question is based off of just sheer ignorance. If a student can't read, or they have significant trouble reading, but they're getting older and their peers are moving on to 4th, 5th grade, you know, you hear these stories about kids sometimes not being, you know, they keep getting advanced to different grades because that's where they should be doing, but they don't really read all that well. How do you tackle something like that?
Yeah, so, you know, each student is an individual. So it's really knowing the individual needs of students, and is it making sure that whatever intervention we are doing or support we're putting in place for those students, it's really aligned to what their need is so that we can close those gaps. And so that is something, you know, the research says 95% of the population should be able to figure out those brain pathways with the instruction. And so it's just really making sure that we are matching the intentional instruction that we're doing to what that skill deficit is for that student. And so we can start to do that now with better assessments. You know, our teachers having more knowledge is really important. So yes, there are going to be students with gaps, but how are we addressing those, and how are we able to shorten them and scaffold things for students so that they can still access grade level? Because reading is so complex, right? So we're talking, in some ways, when we talk about reading, we're talking about decoding, just getting the words up off the page. That doesn't mean a student can't think and have a conversation at grade level with the vocabulary, right? So you don't want to pull that away from them either.
Exactly. And socially too, it's got to be so complicated because they might not have this essential building block, but they have it in other areas. So where do you pull back? Where do you pull ahead? That's a very difficult decision.
And that's where teams and teachers and their knowledge will always be the most important thing for students. And that's something that we really try to ensure people understand, is that a program isn't going to meet the need of every student, but a teacher can. Yeah. And so that's where that teacher investment in their knowledge and empowering them to do that and know their students is number one. Yeah, I agree. And Jen, I think, again, when I ask these questions, you have to understand that I have zero experience outside of being a student myself. I've got to think that while there's science involved and even parents reading, there has to be an inspiration to want to read, for them to see the point of it in order to do it. Is that something kind of built into the curriculum as well? Absolutely. So, you know, one thing that we have talked about with our colleagues is we can't lose that art of teaching. We want to make sure that we're making learning fun every day for our students. And even as adults, we have preferred tasks, things that are easier for us, we enjoy. And so by actually providing our students that explicit and systematic instruction, it's going to unlock it for them. And just like as adults, they're probably going to enjoy and prefer a task that comes more easily to them, that they're capable of, than something that's challenging. So that's part of our recipe, is making sure that we provide the opportunity for them to receive that instruction, to enjoy it. All right, this is a very specific question. Every kid's different. Not every kid likes every book, but what's your magic book that has unlocked that inspiration for the most kids? Oh, there's so many books that come to mind. As a former 5th grade teacher, a book that I always use was Wonder, and it talks about a student with differences and talking about kindness. And I think in our world, that's what we want to keep spreading, is more kindness. So, you know, it's interesting. My son read that in 5th grade, and that was actually it was a perfect book, but it came with difficulties because I think it was the first book that had any type of adversity or conflict for him. And if the student had some deformities in the face, I believe, I don't know if that's the right word, I apologize if it's not, but and how he was treated, how people stood up for him and things like that. And I think he was it brought up a lot of emotions and questions that he didn't have before. So that's a very powerful book. And I think that's one important piece, is that we want to provide our students with opportunities to see outside of themselves when we work with different texts. So we're very intentional with the texts that we use with students during instruction, and providing many opportunities within our classrooms and our school libraries for students to be exposed to both literature and as well as that nonfiction informational text. Yeah, great movie, by the way, too. It is. I think one of the characters is Autumn or something like that. Anyway, I'm glad you brought that up. So, Sarah, where do we go from here with this transition, not just in Gates Chili? Are you in discussions with other districts? Is everyone kind of taking a similar approach with their own kind of nuance? Yeah, I mean, I can't really speak for other districts. I think, I've really been focused on Gates Chili.
Yeah, of course, of
Yeah.
course. But I know in discussions, because you are the element, I'm sure you have conferences and whatnot. Is everybody kind of getting on the same page from what you can gather? You don't have to say it explicitly.
Yeah, I think
definitely.
that, I think everybody understands the importance of literacy, and no one disagrees with that. So I just think it's everybody really seeing where they are and where they ought to get to,
Do you think, as parents explore this, you often hear about they have a reading coach or anything like that? How vital is that? I mean, do parents have to explore things outside the school district, or are the resources there in the school for them?
We feel confident that we have a program that can meet the needs of our students within the school day.
Yeah. When, we talked about how things were kind of disparate in different schools and whatnot, how long did that, give me a timeline. How long was that? I mean, was there a time when it kind of looked more uniform like it is now? Just given a history that you may or may not know within the district.
Yeah, I mean, I can't speak because I was in a building,
right,
making an assumption that building was similar to all the others. You know what I mean? So it wasn't really until we stepped out of our buildings into these roles, looking district-wide, that we recognized we had a couple different things happening. And so just how do we better align that for our students and our staff so we can provide better support?
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
And Jen, Sarah was saying that, there's a 4-day workshop now and it's getting everybody on board. How is that? Because you do have teachers who are maybe teaching it one way, the conversion, if you will. How has that process been?
You know what? My colleagues are fantastic. I mean, I would put my own children in Gates Chili in a heartbeat. So, it's a journey, right? We learn from each other. Every time I have a new group of teachers, I'm learning from them as well, because they're the ones that are still in the classroom every single day. So it's really coming together, bringing that research and what we know and being collaborative and working together and building that partnership to see what is going to be best for our students here in Gates Chili. But I mean, they are great about coming to the training. I actually just started another group and they're very excited. There's some of our new staff to Gates Chili. So
how do you, and I guess we'll direct it right back to you, Jen, how do you deal with, you've got introverts, kids who might not want to read aloud. How do you make sure that kids are making not just legibly writing it down or whatnot, how do you make sure that they are leveling up?
Part of it is building a culture in your classroom that everyone does everything. And so, again, it comes back to relationships. It's really important for teachers to build that culture and understanding in their classroom. And each teacher has very different ways of listening in, going up next to a child as a whole group, maybe completing a task. And I would say my colleagues, I can say confidently, know their students and what their abilities are, because we are so intentional with using the data from our assessments to help inform the approaches that they're taking in the classroom.
Speaking of time in the classroom in the school district, my last question is going to go to Sarah. Sarah, if you could talk about WIN a little bit.
Sure.
And WIN time.
So we, in our shift, recognized that Tier 1, right, that first level of instruction, that grade level access was really important for all students, and we wanted to protect that time. So we, in this shift to a structured literacy approach, really defined how much time that is at each grade level and what the expectations were during that time. But we recognize, as we've kind of talked throughout this session, right, is that there are students that have varying needs. And so we have carved out time that we call WIN, or what I need time, for each student to get what they need, so that the Tier 1 grade level instruction doesn't continue while some kids are going to get something else that they need, right? And so this allows us to have time where some students that have those gaps in skills can go and get intervention, and they can have that time to get that skill reinforcement that they need. This allows other students in the grade level who may need some extension, right? And they can extend their learning. They have that opportunity to dive into that. Other students who might just need additional practice with the grade level material, it's time for them to get that. So everyone's able to get what they need without a group of students continuing to move ahead in the curriculum or the standards without some of their peers.
Very good. Sarah Messino, Jen Christensen, thank you so much for joining us, and thank you for teaching our kids to read.
No, thank you.
We appreciate it. So thank you, by the way, to our viewers for listening in, and telling your friends about the Rochester First streaming app that they can put onto their smartphone. We really appreciate all the time that Gates Chili has given us today, and we wish you the best. We hope to see you back here tomorrow for another edition of Adam Interviews, and until then, take care.
Get the Rochester First streaming app today for everything you love from News 8 On Demand, plus exclusive shows you won't see anywhere else. Search ROC and download for free on Roku, Amazon Fire, and Apple TV.